Hello, my friends. Here are the three big stories for today. The first story comes in multiple parts, and it's partly about the Tu-22M3 bomber that just crashed, and partly about trains that are breaking down in the railroad system that has problems, and partly about corruption, and partly about sanctions, and partly about the appearance or the veneer of looking tougher than maybe Russia actually was, but they believed themselves to be, and that was the interesting thing about this. Okay, so the Tu-22M3 bomber, a carrier of X-22 cruise missiles that Russia uses to kill Ukrainians, has crashed in the Chernihiv district of the Irkutsk region in Russia. A little bit more about that here. These bombers are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Well, this one's no longer able to carry any nuclear weapon. Now, that bomber crashed, and it crashed partly because it didn't have, well, an engine failure or some sort. It looks like it wasn't shot down, and that might be a function of sanctions. And just like trains are derailing over around Russia, a freight train derailed and crashed into a warehouse in Orenburg region, and the person in charge of all the railroads was just putting out a message that, like, hey, look, things are getting really bad on the railroads. We're not sure we can quite hold it together. And they are more dependent on railroads than we are here in the United States. So between that and the Tu-22M3 bomber that just crashed, this is the same bomber. Jason J. Smart said, sanctions work. Russian airplanes are falling out of the sky. Well, it's not that just this bomber. It's other planes. It's the railroads. It's a lack of response to what's happening in Kursk. It's all these things. And so I saw this. Russia has vulnerabilities that the West simply has not been exploiting. And this is the first big story. On the contrary, U.S. incrementalism has helped the Kremlin offset and mask its weaknesses. Did you catch that? Our policy of incrementalism has helped the Kremlin offset and mask its weaknesses. It's really weaker than it looked like, but our slowness has helped Russia be more successful. The Kremlin's weaknesses include its inability to rapidly pivot, dependence on others for Russia's capabilities to sustain the war, and years of risk accumulation that Putin is yet to reckon with. The Kremlin is vulnerable to an adversary who can generate momentum against Russia and deny the Kremlin opportunities to regroup and adapt. We didn't see Russia as vulnerable, but it's really exposing itself now. And it turns out it doesn't look like Putin's very happy with his chief general here. Russian sources say that criminal cases are being prepared for Russian generals due to failure in Kursk region's defense. Well, somebody's head's going to roll, and it's not going to be Putin's. That's the way that he works, because part of the weakness of Russia is the authoritarian system where he's never to blame for anything, and it's always some subordinate. So looks like maybe Gerasimov is on the chopping block, or maybe Shoigu, and well, Shoigu's a sideline, but maybe Belousov. Okay, the cleansing of the Russian Ministry of Defense, which started after the dismissal of Shoigu, may continue with a new series of arrests of high-ranking law enforcers who failed in the defense of the Kursk region. It's reported that Gerasimov, head of the general staff, has fallen into Putin's disfavor. Well, why has he fallen into Putin's disfavor? He didn't see it coming. He ignored the reports. Turns out he kind of fudged about what was going on, so he's not very well liked now. Russian intelligence knew about preparations for operation in Kursk region. They did. They saw him massing on the border, but they ignored it and said they're not going to do that. But Russian general staff ignored those reports and hid information from Putin. Well, of course, the authoritarian system that he runs demands that they hide bad news from him and they only tell him good news. That's the way the system is geared. The Kremlin is now very unhappy with Gerasimov, according to Bloomberg. Okay, this is something new. Thousands of Russian soldiers are giving up. Predominantly, they appear to be new and untrained conscripts, but it does indicate that the Russian military are unmotivated and disorganized. Russia seems to have sent its worst troops to encounter Ukraine in Kursk. So this is just, whether it's the plane, the trains, the conscripts, all of these are these weak spots in what's going on in the Russian military. It doesn't mean that everything is weak. They still have nuclear weapons. They still are pushing toward Pokrovsk, and they're actually gaining ground there. But there's a certain weakness there that we just didn't see before. Okay, second big story. He's back. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi deserves recognition for the initial phase of the Kursk operation. He really does. I remember when he first was introduced and people were like, oh man, this is going to be really bad. The first 10 days of the Kursk operation have been highly successful for Ukraine. Their planning, execution, operational security have been nearly flawless. Although the future is uncertain, Syrskyi deserves to be commended for progress achieved so far. When Syrskyi took over from Zaluzhny, many analysts quickly criticized the decision. Syrskyi was known as a micromanager who frequently spent time on the front lines, instilling fear in many officers and being prepared to accept high losses if necessary. Reputation rarely arises without a reason. However, it's important to remain humble and acknowledge that we lack complete information on everything that we analyze. This applies to Syrskyi as well. Now, I remember when he was actually first installed and reading about him and thinking like, I don't know about it. But then about a week into it, he made a speech where he was talking about how, look, my highest priority is to make sure that every life that is spent, it's valuable, and we spend it as economically as possible. That's my translation of what he said. But he said something like that, and I was very encouraged by that. And he also talked about technological means to push the war as well, and he's been doing that faithfully. When examining the past operations for which Syrskyi has received both praise and criticism, it's unclear how much influence he had in the decision-making process. We do not know if he was simply following orders from higher authorities, but now he's in charge, and let's see how it's going to go when he's in charge, and it seems to be working out well. It's evident that many lessons have been learned from previous operations, including successful Kharkiv counteroffensive and the unsuccessful counteroffensive of 2023, as well as from past incursions and the events in Kryvyi. We are uncertain about the planning of the remainder of the operation. Let's observe how things unfold from here, but so far, so good. The first 10 days of the operation were planned and executed so effectively that there is optimism for the days ahead as well. And it's really been quite a change in the morale and motivation on the Ukrainian side. We must exercise patience and keep in mind that we lack significant information when evaluating Syrskyi. But so far, yeah, I got to give him high marks. Now, when I was thinking about the operation that's happening right now in Kursk, my mind went right back to the art of war. Remember, focusing on strengths and exploiting weaknesses? Capitalize on your strengths and find ways to exploit the weaknesses of your competitors. By leveraging your advantages and targeting their vulnerabilities, you can gain an edge. Now, that's just a paraphrase, but the actual line from the art of war would be, attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected. And that's exactly what Syrskyi did with the Ukrainian army in Kursk. Okay. Last story, the Pentagon is working on fixes to allow Ukraine to launch weapons from its fighter jets. They haven't made any decisions yet. They're trying to sort out whether they can or can't, or when they will be able, or if they might be able to. Like, come on, Biden, you can do this. Okay. The debate over JSAM and the Biden administration's willingness to explore its transfer makes the missile the latest in a long line of sophisticated weapons once considered off limits to transfer in Ukraine. But the red lines have not meant anything. Like, you've seen it time and time and time again. Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, we're like on fool me 6 times now, and nothing's happened. Gary Kasparov says debates and delays. The moment Russia is defeated and Ukraine is free, the first question that will be asked is, why didn't we act earlier? Ukrainians are murdered daily, and we are moving so slowly to stop the dictator in the Kremlin. It's an unforgivable choice. Okay. Last little bit. First week of the invasion. Hey, I was doing this. I remember exactly that. First week of the invasion, checking to see if Zelensky is alive. 904th day of the invasion, checking Twitter to see if Putin is dead. Well, we might not be doing that, but the momentum shift is so significant that it's something like that kind of difference in magnitude. And then finally, here's Russia. Here's not Russia. Also not Russia. This is not Russia. Does this look like Russia? Also not Russia. Too early to say. Maybe Russia? Like, that's a big difference from where we were in the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine 2.5 years ago. Okay, thank you, my friends. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. If you're a member or a patron, be looking out. I'll post it on the membership tab on YouTube on post. I'll make a member explicit only member post, or on Patreon, I'll post it there for patrons about the live stream on Saturday morning. And thank you all for being the kind of people that care about Ukraine.